concludes our first round. We're going to move on to our next round, which is sort of a mixed bag. What I've done is I've randomized the order, so you will each get a surprise, unique question. And don't forget, you have 30 seconds to jump in on a candidate's question. Be careful, choose that question wisely. If you use that 30 seconds, you won't be able to speak again until it's your turn to be directly questioned. And if you've already been directly questioned, that's it. So if you do want to use your 30 seconds on any one of these following questions, just raise your hands and I'll try and take you in order. Okay? All right. Clear as mud. So you will have 1 minute and 30 seconds to address the question. The first one goes to Michael O'Connor. Mr. O'Connor, the Historic Preservation Commission has had a somewhat checkered past in the history in the city. What are your thoughts on the HPC's powers? Are there too many regulations? Not enough? How would you change it?
I can only assume that you gave me this question because I'm the liaison to the Historic
Completely
Preservation.
random, I swear.
Certainly, of course. And it's been a great pleasure to be the liaison to the HPC because the reality is the benefits that we derive from downtown Frederick, what it means in downtown Frederick is largely a function of having that historic preservation overlay. It is what has kept downtown Frederick a place of charm, a place of vibrancy. It's critically important to our long-term future. What I've seen in the time that I've spent as the liaison of the HPC is, quite honestly, a changing in terms of that approach, and a lot of that I think is intentional in terms of our internal processes. We've expanded the ability of our staff to do administrative approvals, and so we might have at any given bi-monthly, twice-monthly agenda, 5 or 6 cases that come before the HPC, but there's an administrative approvals report that's 3 times longer in terms of the number of cases that never came before the commission. They simply came through an administrative approvals process, and I think that's a positive development because that's cutting down on the kinds of things that people say is a problem with the HPC. There's no question that as we look at all of the rules and regulations in the city of Frederick, our historic district is no different. If there are rules that aren't working, we should change them. And we've, in the city of Frederick, looked at this in terms of demolition delay. We've looked at this in terms of how can we streamline the process, as I mentioned, on administrative approval. So a constant evaluation of our procedures and the way we do business is always prudent.
Thank you. I swear the questions are randomized too, so just how it happens. Mr. Lynch, you'd like to use your 30 seconds?
Yes, I will. I'm not going to repeat what Michael said, but I agree with what he said. Historic preservation adds economic value. They've worked very hard to give support to citizens so they don't come before the commission and not understand what they need to accomplish and how to get it done and how we can help them. I worked for 3 years to bring archaeological review to the city land management code, led a statewide effort to support that, accomplished it. I support historic preservation and will continue to do so.
Thank you. Anyone else? Very good. Our next question goes to Donna Kazumchak. Ms. Kazumchak, every day the traffic on city roads seems to increase, and yet there's very little help that's been received or we're expected to receive from the state to maintain our roadways, let alone improve them. Where is road maintenance in your list of priorities, and what can be done to halt further deterioration of that transportation network?
Traffic is a huge issue in the city of Frederick. Traffic has been an issue in the city of Frederick since I moved here in 1985. I keep forgetting what year I've been here. Traffic will always be an issue. As we expand, we are going to have temporary traffic nightmares, like we have out by Clemson Corner. And we're going to have long-term traffic issues, like we have the rest of the way on Route 15. We have to work with the state and the county and the federal government to expand our traffic. More importantly, we need to bring businesses to Frederick. If we can make Frederick a place businesses want to be, we can live, work, and play in Frederick and lessen the amount of traffic that are on those roads. We also need to make sure that the traffic, we have a grid system in the downtown. Many of you hate dealing with the one-way streets, but those actually help our traffic patterns. As we expand, as the city expands, we need to make sure that there are also grid patterns in the outlying areas. Part of the problem is we don't have enough ways to get in and get out. I am against ever allowing only one entrance in and out of a place, because I think that that causes even worse traffic issues. Overlays, road overlays have to be part of everyday, of our everyday budget.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming short. Would anybody else care to speak to the issue of transportation? Mr. Daniels, please feel free to use your 30 seconds.
Just a quick comment on traffic. Traffic is an issue. Traffic is always a lagging component of economic and residential development. We don't really do a complete study, in my opinion, on the impact of traffic outside of a small radius when we do our site plan approvals. We need to really work with the state a lot more, because those choke points are normally at those state entrance and exit points from US 15 and those other places. And so if they're not on the same timeline we are, we should probably pull back some of that development in those areas to relieve that traffic pressure.
Very good, thank you very much. Our next question goes to Derek Shackelford. Dr. Shackelford, how much should city government be involved in subsidizing what is traditionally the domain of private sector business? For example, this Weinberg Center of the Arts, the Clustered Spires Golf Course, 2 pools, and Harry Grove Stadium.
Any investment that the city undertakes in regards to investment has to be beneficial for the growth of the city and also for its taxpayers. Take for instance the airport. If we're talking about economic development, it's wise for us to invest in an airport. When we're in a metropolitan area such as between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, we have corporations and job opportunities that can be created that can create commerce opportunities, that can create great economic development. It's wise for the city in terms to make these type of investments, but it also has to be consideration in terms of the taxpayer. You don't want to place any undue burden on the taxpayer in the future. So it's wise in terms of how we look at economic development in terms of the vitality of our city. Is it going to be beneficial for jobs? And also we need to do some economic impact studies. It's not simply enough for us to talk about economic development, but looking at how these jobs will create in terms of well-paying jobs, in terms of how it does for our education system. So when we talk about any type of economic development and investment in our city, we must be wise, we must be cautious, we must be careful, but we also must be bold and innovative and creative at the same time.
Thank you. Would anybody else care to speak to that? Moving on. Next question goes to our candidate on the end, Josh Bokey. Mr. Bokey, should the city pursue an aquatic center? If so, why? And how should such a project using public funds be approached? If not, why not? And maybe what should we do instead?
It's important that when we look at investments that we make in the city and amenities that we have in the city, that they have a potential to benefit citizens citywide. And so, to me, an aquatic center, if we can do it through a public-private type partnership, can benefit city residents. It can be a positive investment for the city if we are practical in how we approach it, and we come up with a plan that it would be phased in. In terms of what a location, a final location could be, there could be a number of different options, but I think we've got to look at it closer, although certainly the Hargett Farm property could offer that opportunity given the restrictions on the uses that the Hargett Farm currently has. The Hargett Farm is, of course, another issue in and of itself, but when we look at amenities and where we want to place amenities throughout the city, I think looking at our areas such as the west side of the city and the Hargett Farm property could offer that potential.
Thank you. Anyone else care to speak to that issue? Ms. Kazumchik?
Thank you. I think an aquatic center is part of a larger issue, and that is whether or not we have enough ability for recreation in the city. I do think the Hargett property is the perfect place to have that recreational ability. As Josh, I agree that it should be a public-private partnership, and I think that there should be a number of different things that are put there, an aquatic center being one, multi-purpose fields being another, bike pathways. We can expand that property in so many ways, and it can bring a destination to that part of town.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Very good. We'll move on to Kelly Russell. Ms. Russell, should the city open up the primaries to independent, that is unaffiliated voters, or changing the date of the election to another year, say congressional midterms or the presidential cycle?
We've actually had these conversations on this board, and a consensus of this board and mayor has been that we would not move the elections for a couple of reasons. I think the argument for moving the elections has been to increase voter turnout, which we all know is abysmal in the city of Frederick, so I would encourage everybody to get out and vote. The downside to that is that you get lost in a ballot that has a number of candidates, and the city would end up at the bottom, and so there is voter fatigue, or voting parties, or voting alphabetically, and those kinds of things. So the consensus was that we felt that it was more beneficial to have the voters coming and being focused on the city issues. In terms of partisan versus nonpartisan, personally, my thoughts on that are that while issues at the local level aren't necessarily partisan, and they're really not, when you know what party a person is affiliated with, you get a general idea of their focus and philosophy on how they view things. So, for example, a Democrat might view budget issues differently than a Republican in terms of overall philosophy. So, it's my feeling that it does serve a purpose, and we've also had that conversation, and the consensus was to leave things the way that they are. So, again, it's not that you're drilling down to, is our city streets a Republican or a Democratic issue or an independent issue, but it's about philosophy of thought, in my opinion.
Very good, thank you. We've got 2 more questions coming up for those 4 candidates who are sitting on your 30 seconds, just as warning there. Mr. Lynch, our next question goes to you. Negotiations over police contracts have been occasionally contentious over the years. When the next round of bargaining comes up in 2015, I believe, what is the most crucial element of the deal you believe should be sought?
A specific contract, or just general? Oh.
In general.
It's
your minute and a half.
Anything we engage in on the public dime in our contract, whether it's economic development or paying for police services or any of the government services and employees, they should be done with an eye to real economic return. There should be economic studies used. There should be rationales that aren't pulled out of the air somewhere because we've created this idea that we think we have to support and we're going to use the public money to do it. I've been a big critic of a lot of things that have been done. I don't think we've got a good return on Carroll Creek. I saw a couple weeks an annexation passed in part in the 3rd tier. It doesn't have the infrastructure. It will cost millions of dollars, and each year bring back $500 million in taxes that it gets split 2/3 to the county. I don't think that's a good deal. If we could pick up the first 2 blocks of Market Street and put it on Carroll Creek, boy, wouldn't we all love that? I mean, I'd spend millions of dollars to do that because that would really build the city.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? All right, so on this last question, which goes to John Daniels. Ms. Daniels, Frederick motorists are seeing an increasing amount of speed cameras springing up on streets outside schools, along with cameras at intersections to catch red light runners. Please explain your support or your opposition to this program.
Thank you. It's a great question, and look, it only makes sense to embrace technology. I think I opened my opening comments that we need to embrace 21st century technology. It makes absolutely no sense to have to hire a policeman, put him in a car, put him out on the street to tell you that you ran a red light. So to put a camera out there, in my opinion, is wise use of taxpayer dollars. I think that the red light camera system is misunderstood by a lot of people. They think it's a revenue generator, but look, if you don't run the red light, we won't generate revenue. And the same thing with the speed zones that are moved around the city, by the way. Not necessarily trying to trap people into paying additional money to the city, but trying to change behavior. And that's why the cameras are moved from point to point. The purpose of both the red light cameras and the speed cameras are to change that behavior that normally we just assume that's our right to do, and we don't get caught by a real policeman that we didn't really break a law. Thanks.
We'll take Mr. Bokey, then we'll take Dr. Shackelford. Oh, then we'll take Mr. O'Connor, and we'll go to Dr. Shackelford in the end. We'll take it down the line. Mr. Bokey.
But when we talk about whether it's speed cameras or whatever other technology, what we're talking about is ensuring that our police department has the technology and resources that they need to be able to help protect and ensure that our streets are safe, both from a crime perspective, from a traffic perspective, and from a perception perspective. And one of the things that will be a challenge that we need to continue to address is ensure that our police are adequately staffed, that we have enough personnel to be able to protect every neighborhood in the city and add perception that every neighborhood is safe. I think there are recent steps that have been taken to do this, but we have to ensure that it occurs. It's a core function of city government. Thank you.
Very good. Mr. O'Connor.
The state authorizes local jurisdictions to put these kinds of tools in place, and as others have mentioned, it's a technology enhancement, a way to augment the officers that are on the street. These locations have been targeted based on data. It's data-driven policing. It looks at where can we get the best result because of traffic safety concerns first and foremost. And as we do our ongoing evaluation, if we need to take them away or move them, that's the step we should take.
Thank you. Ms. Russell, you'd like to interject? Let's go to Dr. Shackelford, and then we'll take you.
Yes, and I think we have to ensure that it's a detriment, not a revenue source in terms of the way we look at our stoplights. There are often times when folks drive through the city, the stoplight will stop rather quickly. So one has to wonder, is it really to be a detriment, or is it simply to be a revenue generating source?
Thank you, Ms. Russell.
It's about changing behaviors. It's about slowing people down that are moving too fast. It's about stopping in intersections, and data has shown, I'm glad you raised that, actually, that crashes at red lights from somebody rear-ending somebody because a car stopped in front of them are less serious, and there are less fatalities than running red lights. So it doesn't eliminate accidents, but they're less damaging. It's about changing behaviors.
Very good. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. We're going to move on to our general question here again. This is one big question for everybody. So we're going to start at the end with Derek Shackelford, and we're going to come back towards me. Dr. Shackelford, the city is beginning to address a backlog of projects, and you will have seen some of those priorities in the mayor's latest budget. What are the main areas of concern for fiscal 2015, and where would you most like to see spending increase? Also, presuming the need to keep the budget balanced and no new revenue on the horizon, where would you like to see the budget cut?
Well, I think the first aspect we talk about that is we hear during election time oftentimes that we want a fully staffed police force. But the question remains, why is it not fully staffed now? And so if that's going to be a priority of fully staffing the police force, then that's what we have to do. That's first priority. Second priority is recycling, and how do we look at our trash issue? As a city is going to be growing, how do we now encapsulate that necessary service that's going to be necessary for our citizens? So those are two priorities in terms of budgetary items that I would like to look at.
Thank you. Kelly Russell.
Fully staffing our police department is first and foremost. It's understaffed because of budget cuts during the beginning of our administration. The size of the police department is actually reduced, and we've fallen behind because of not being able to backfill as we needed to do. And I've advocated for the last 4 years for us to do that. And so now we're going to have back-to-back police academies, and we are starting to catch up. So that's good. Sustainable practices is something that we need to start focusing on. We need to look at solar power. We have an airport where we could put a solar field, perhaps. We're looking at that feasibility of that. Organics recovery. I'm stealing John Daniels' thunder down here. Increasing our recycling. All of these things that are going to help us reduce our waste going into the landfill. It's going to save energy costs. These eventually lead to budgetary costs. We've done a lot with changing out our lighting to LED lighting, and the savings from the energy bills has just been terrific with just a few small things. And so we need to focus on making the investments in those kinds of initiatives that we know are going to save us money in the end and that are good for the community as a whole as we move forward. And in terms of where we put our budgetary priorities, that's why we asked the citizens of Frederick to come and talk to us at our budget hearings so that we know what your priorities are. I mean, it's very easy for us to say, here's X number of dollars. We don't want to take more dollars than we need, but how do you want us to spend them? Give us that feedback. So it's a collaborative process. We've changed the budgeting process over our administration so that there are multiple hearings, and I would encourage you to participate.
Thank you. And Michael O'Connor.
Budgeting in 90 seconds. Trying to organize these thoughts very quickly in my head. I think the most important things that we have coming up on the horizon for the city of Frederick is what happens on the Golden Mile in terms of the realization of the vision of the small area plan, and then what happens on the east side of Frederick. And the missing component of both of those, it's been referenced earlier by Alderman Russell, is the lack of the regulatory framework to actually create those visions in the way that they've been laid out. And so there has to be some funding put forward in order to do that, and that may mean additional planning staff, it may mean hiring consultants to look at things that Mr. Lynch has talked about, form-based codes, overlay zones, those kinds of things to be able to achieve those visions. So that's one area where I think resources need to go. We often talk about where you can spend and where you can cut, but oftentimes, particularly with the use of technology, it's how can you stretch the resources that we're already spending in ways that don't necessarily require to put more money in, but you get more result out, and technology is a key component of that. How we could expand our GIS, our Geographic Information Systems, in a way that could make more information available to the community so that they have a greater stake in the planning decisions, in the policing efforts. All of that is a simple investment in technology that can expand the public's access. The last rate we have in our term, without going into the gory details on tax differential, the combined tax rate of city residents has actually been reduced over the last 4 years as a result of the actions of the 60th administration.
Thank you very much. Jack Lynch.
I think we're seeing some improvement in the budget in terms especially of how we fund CIP projects. My concern is that we put resources into all areas of the city, that we're not spending too much money on parkland and Hargett Farm. We're not talking about helping fund a downtown hotel motel, which the economics do not look right for. If you look at the room rates in Frederick County and the availability of rooms and the conference market for a 200-room hotel. And I heard a lot of other good things that can be done. There's plenty of places to spend the money. We certainly need more police officers. We need to work on the shared use and bike paths. We need to take a look at green infrastructure as the state's requirements increase on that. I'd like to see a model project up Market Street. I'd like to see some money put into North Market Street rather than more in Carroll Creek. Let's put it where residents already are, and we need to help businesses.
Thank you very much. Dr. Simpson.
Budget has two parts, the capital and the operating budget. I think for the capital budget, the first thing we've got to do is finish what we've started. We have started Monocacy Boulevard and we've started the Carroll Creek Linear Park. We need to finish them before we move on to starting another project. Once that's done, I would like to start the Hargett property, but again, that's probably a 30-year project. In our operating budget, I'd like to see us put money into police and code enforcement for safety in livable neighborhoods. I'd also like to see us pay attention to trash. I believe that we need to bring bulk trash back. It doesn't cost as much as people seem to think that it does. I understand that it uses a lot of city resources for a couple of days, but people recycle from those trash whenever it's sitting out at the curb. And there are people who don't have trucks and they don't have ways to get their trash, their heavy items to the landfill. So I do believe we should bring back bulk trash. And I think the government should be accessible to all people, so we should expand neighborhood advisory councils and other neighborhood groups.
Thank you. John Daniels.
Yeah, the way I see this is the question is what projects to fund, what projects to move up, and what projects to cut. First of all, we need to fully fund our police department in a way that enables them to reach the 141 sworn officers that are required on the street. Our funding mechanism for the police has prevented us from achieving that, and currently our authorized manning is 141, we're at 119 or 120, so our police are stretched. So I would say we should move up a funding project for those police. Investment in parks. The recommended ratio of parks per acre is 10 per population is 10 per 1,000. And when the 2010 comp plan was written, we were at about 8. We were running about 20% behind in parks and parks facilities. And if you look in our neighborhood, you can see which neighborhoods are missing those park and recreation facilities. It's not hard to figure out that we're not evenly distributing that resource to the other neighborhoods. So I'd like to see us spend some money there. I'd like to see us spend some money on getting a strategic plan in place. We passed a resolution recently to move forward with the strategic planning for the city, and I think that strategic planning is an absolutely essential component for us to build a plan to move forward. Actually, the bulk trash issue, I can say that I chaired that committee. Bulk trash, according to what we reported to the committee, was $68,750 per pickup. That's twice a year. The majority of the items that were being picked up were recyclable, and our people were having to take them to the dump. So I support the reduction of bulk trash, but not necessarily the elimination of it.
Thank you very much. Josh Bookie.
You know, I want to open this first by saying that I give credit to city officials and frankly anyone who's been in elected office over the last 4 years at any level, that we really have just now emerging from one of the worst economic crises the country's ever faced. And these have presented really difficult challenges for folks to make on what to cut, what to keep, and what to try to maintain. So let's put that into that context. And then I think there's three parts to this answer. The first two were mentioned earlier, but the first is operating budget. And I think it's been mentioned, Alderman Russell had mentioned this, and I agree that, you know, we've got to ensure, obviously, that our police staff is fully authorized force is funded. We need to ensure that our code enforcement inspectors have the resources and tools that they need. We mentioned before, I'd like to see that we can try to implement weekly recycling. I know those blue bins are overflowing, and obviously bulk trash pickup. The second part is the CIP, which I have some familiarity with, even though I have not served on the Board of Aldermen, because CIP projects came through as recommendations through the city's planning commission. We saw the backlog there, we see the needs, we see the needs through the different neighborhoods and the city as a whole. And one of those, again, as I come back to, is streets and roads improvements. Larger projects, absolutely, they're critical, they've been mentioned, but we're talking about sidewalk repairs that now is beginning to get underway as funding is starting to increase. We were hurt significantly from lack of funding from budget crunches, but we want to ensure, how does that work? What is the map? How do people know what those next steps are going to be? And then the fourth part is not just about the resources, but I believe about how do we ensure we get true collaboration from our departments, because we are living in an era of real limited resources on that. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. That ends our third round.